Okay, folks, thank you very much for joining the session, and I am pleased to be here. I'm honored to be here. This is a great opportunity, and what we're going to do, we're going to explore different possibilities and different approaches, actually, to competitive advantage. And we're going to really start at about the 25 to 30,000 foot level. And then what I ask each of us to do is to think about applications within their own experiences as employees or as businesses or as entrepreneurs. The agenda, I want to cover 4 topics. I'm going to be relatively quick on this. Some of it is fairly theoretical. As I said, it's 25 to 30,000 foot approach. And the best part of all this is how you might consider your own experiences within the context of what it is I'm speaking about. So we're going to talk about what are the competition basics. So this is so basic that it will be kind of obvious, but we'll put it into MBA language. We'll look at a model that the Logistics Institute created a number of years ago based on some research done at MIT, and it's the pursuit of excellence. So while the focus is primarily supply chain and logistics, in reality, it's the pursuit of excellence. The model can be applied to almost any company whatsoever. Then we're going to look at competitive advantage from 2 different points of view. And then at the end, we're going to look at supply chain and supply chain logistics as the Logistics Institute defines it within terms of a market-driven model. So it's taking competition and competitive advantage and moving it closer to the market itself. So to be competitive, there are really 3 determinants. This is as obvious as you could get. First of all, it's about benefit. What is the real benefit that your product or service provides? So looking at it from the end user's point of view, the customer, if you will, what benefit? Another term for it is what value do we deliver in the marketplace such that someone is prepared to buy whatever it is that we have, whether it's a product or a service, from us and from nobody else. So benefit is key. Second is our target market. How well do we understand our customers? All right, and both the customers we already have, but generally customers, depending on the kind of business we have. And even more importantly, how well do we understand their needs? All right, notice I didn't say their desires, because we usually look at this in terms of what is the desire on the part of the customer. Okay, let's bring it a little bit deeper into the context of needs. And the third is, well, what do we mean by competition? Now that might be pretty obvious. It is about a competitive advantage. But the question here is, how do we identify our real competitors? And the emphasis is on the word real, right? Because this is where many organizations make their biggest mistake. It's more than just similar companies or products or services. So our competitors are not necessarily only, say, if we're in the automobile industry, GM versus Ford or Toyota. It is that, but it isn't only that, and that's what I want us to keep in mind. It includes anything that our customers could do to meet the need that we currently fill for them. Anything. And this becomes important, especially in an e-commerce kind of context, where the product itself might have a secondary interest. It's access to the product that becomes the primary interest and the primary motivator. And so we have here an example. Newspapers, and yes, there were such things as newspapers, which are print versions. You know, The Economist is still a print version, although you can get it online. A magazine, and news magazine, and economics magazine, and so on and so forth. But newspapers thought that their competition was other newspapers until they realized that their real competition was the internet. right? They didn't know how to compete with a news provider that is free and instantaneous. So when we talk about competition, we have to really ask ourselves, who are our real competitors? Very important question to keep in mind. So to be competitive, there are two fundamentals, right? It's pretty straightforward. Cost, price, if you will, price and cost, and that nexus of price and cost, and then differentiation. What makes us different from everybody else? All right, cost isn't always, or price that we sell an item for isn't always the differentiator. All right, and then there are three generic strategies around cost and differentiation. One is, are you the cost leader in your particular vertical or market? Are you a differentiation leader? Is your product or service so unique, right, that differentiates you from everybody else and makes you the leader in that field? And then there are two variants on these generic strategies, and they're focus variants. One is the cost focus, the lowest possible cost, and the other is differentiation focus. Are you part of a niche? Have you created a niche? Now, this has come out of Michael Porter, late 80s, early 90s, and this is how he has sized up competitive markets, if you will. Markets are either broad or narrow, and the source of competitive advantage, the differentiation or costs. Cost in a broad approach to market is you create cost leadership, where you could be the cheapest game in town, and that's going to give you the edge over everybody else. In a more narrow focused to cost, it's the cost focus. It takes on a slightly different meaning, and we'll get into that. If you are in a broad market and you focus on differentiation, there is, potentially your product might give you that leadership edge. If you're in a more narrow market where, let's say, there are products and products and products and so on and so forth, the differentiation between one product and another is what gives you the edge. And I'll give you the example. What we have here would be the Aston Martin versus a Tesla. You figure out where you would put either one of those and in which of those quadrants you think they belong. Okay, so to be competitive, a cost leader. A cost leader is the lowest price to customers. And we're all familiar with this, no matter what part of the world we're in. There are internal operational efficiencies, there are economies of scale to buy in bulk, and so we have the Walmarts of the world, and any variation of that, Tesco, Costco, and so on and so forth. Most grocery, if you will, and types of retail are basically that low-cost leadership. Not all of them. The differentiation side of this is we compete on benefits, not just on costs. So there's a quality issue here, all right? And it's also sometimes about faster delivery, but the quality of the product overrides a lot of this. There's a strong target marketing. So you go after the particular target market that will buy a particular product, whatever the cost might be. So it's that kind of focus. It's premium pricing. This is not cheap. This is not inexpensive. And then, of course, there are higher profit margins on the part of the company. The drivers are innovation, quality, and customer service. And it depends on what the value or purpose is. What's the value or purpose of a Tesla or any variation of a Tesla? And what's the value or purpose of an Aston Martin or a Mercedes or a BMW or a Toyota, to use those examples. And then when we deal with focus, the real concern is how strong is your sense of the market? And are you going to create a niche here where no one else is going to compete with you because you have a superior focus on product? It's all about the status at any price, and that's what an Aston Martin is. If you don't know what an Aston Martin is, go Google it. It's rather interesting. Because it's that racing car, it's the 007 car, it's the James Bond car. And so if you really and truly have this aspiration to be a James Bond or a racing type of person, it doesn't matter what the cost is. The Aston Martin will be what you go after. Actually, you probably don't even think about the quality, because an Aston Martin might fall apart faster than anything else, but that's a different issue. It's an Aston Martin. That's what you're buying. You're buying the brand, you're buying the name, whatever the price. Superior focus on price is really, it's also about status, but it's at a specific price. So a Tesla is put at a specific price, but the reason for a Tesla is environmental concerns. All right, so people will go out of the way, pay that extra cost, and feel good about their approach to environmental concerns. All right, so there's a focus niche kind of differentiation and cost approach. So let's look at these in how we would run a business. Now think about the businesses that you're either part of or want to be part of, or a career that you're looking for a job somewhere. And so you want to suss out what kinds of companies are there and what kinds of companies do I want to work for. And if we look at how we analyze how companies run their businesses, and there are 5 different approaches. We have to look at their goal or their value proposition, if you will. We have to look at their processes, what are their drivers, what is the context within which they compete, and of course, what is their competitive strategy. So a cost leadership company, I'm only looking at 2, cost leadership and differentiation leadership. Cost leadership, it's the lowest cost producer. Their process is really economies of scale. So they'll produce a lot of something because it's less expensive. Think of something as ordinary as toothpaste. Now you may say, or toilet paper, even more interesting. Sorry to say toilet paper is interesting, but it is, because there are lots of commercials out there about quality of toilet paper. When we really think about it, toilet paper is toilet paper, period. And so it's produced at an economy of scale and larger numbers and amounts, and it's more mass marketing, and it's less expensive than other things. Drivers, if the price equals the market average, then the lowest cost makes the best profits. Now, notice that first part. You can't be too low or too much below the market average, then you're too cheap. And this is very interesting. Too cheap isn't necessarily going to lead to the best profits. So that's got to be something to keep in mind. You've got to at least match market average and be at the low end of it. That's a driver of cost leadership. The context, so we're talking about large-scale businesses. We're talking about the retail, mass marketing companies, retails, groceries, so on and so forth. It's standard products. Toilet paper is toilet paper is toilet paper. Accessible and acceptable to the majority of customers. So I go to a store in order to buy this because it's there, period. Not because the store is any better than any other location. It might be a little cheaper in this kind of a store than in that kind of a store, but I know it's going to be there. Of course, the strategy is, high levels of productivity. You've got to push a lot of the stuff off the line. This is a product-driven kind of economic approach. get those products out, get them out as much as possible, as often as possible, replenish them as quickly as possible, and put a price on it so that we have mass purchasing, or as much purchasing as possible. So high capacity utilization internally. We negotiate the lowest prices for our product inputs. It's a lean production approach, often enough. Use of technology in the production process. So you might see companies that are cost leadership types of companies that will have fewer people but more technology. Why? Because people are expensive. Technology isn't. It's the AI approach to the elimination of people as employees. That's going into the future. You can ask questions later on that one. And then access to the most effective distribution channels. Just get it out there. If we were to look more closely at differentiation leadership, we see the goal is targeting larger markets. All right, so the larger market across an entire industry. So we're talking about a Ford or a Toyota or a General Motors or whomever. And so it's the automobile industry. That's the whole industry, but you're targeting my product against the whole industry. The process is customer oriented, but you're also dealing with unique issues. So trying to meet the unique requirements or expectations of the customer. I have an example I'll get back to on that, which I found interesting. Drivers, premium pricing reflecting higher production costs with extra value-added features for the consumer. And it's about brand loyalty at premium prices. It may be a little more expensive, but I want to buy a Ford, or I want to buy a Chevrolet, or I want to buy a Buick, or what have you. And of course, the strategy is quality. It's about brand. It's about industry-wide distribution across all the major channels, not just across any channel, all right? Where the brand is an essential item to be stocked and sold. And then, of course, the promotion is dominated by advertising and sponsorships. Question that I would ask you if we had an open discussion right now, which we don't, is, what do you think was the most sold automobile, the automobile that sold the most, the automobile maker that sold the most, if I can put it in correct English, automobile maker that sold the most in China in the beginning of the 21st century. And much to my surprise, because I'm in and out of China quite regularly, much to my surprise that it was the Buick. And there's a reason for that. And it's the understanding of the market on the part of the Buick producers, the people who produce Buicks in China. And the market is the Chinese family was the market, where the husband drives, the wife sits in the back, not in the front next to the husband, but with the one child. All right. And what Buick did in China was to add certain features that were oriented to the mother of the child and the child, not to the driver, the man. Cup holders, video capability, entertainment, sippy cups, or anything else you think of. And that became the most popular automobile in that market for the longest time, and still is. And it's not inexpensive. So you have to know your market, and you have to know what your market need is. By the way, a lot of this, the difference between cost and differentiation, is really built around the question, how do you make $1 million? Well, you can sell one item for $1 million, or you can sell 1 million items for $1 each. That's the difference between those two. All right, so keep that in mind. So having said that, we have this model that we created called the Pursuit of Excellence, and it's built on MIT research from a number of years ago. Basically, what it focuses on is, let's say any company, but we're talking here because of who we are, the Logistics Institute, a supply chain logistics excellence model, but it's bigger than that. You can be an automobile manufacturer, and you could use the same two reference points, external and internal, as a way to understand your competitive advantage better. So external forces are things like global economics, trade regulations, geopolitics, labor laws, green laws, technology demands, trends, and competitive landscape. Internal capabilities is how do you manufacture or produce, what's your distribution network, how do you handle information, who are your people, your human resources, materials and parts, and then of course your infrastructure, how do you organize. What's interesting around this is while those internal and external look complicated, in reality it's a much larger dimension of complexity. In the next slide I'm going to show you, you're not able to read, but it's an order of magnitude slide, and that is, this is, when you burst out all those different features, how complex competitive advantage can be, either through internal capabilities or dealing with external forces. No, you cannot read this. And even when you get a copy of this, you're not going to be able to read all those pieces. However, the purpose of my showing this to you is to introduce us to the reality of complexity. It's not a simple world. It's not a complicated world, but it is complex, and we should be prepared to deal with complexity. And by the way, for me, that is the primary learning or lesson being learned out of COVID, is our inability to deal with complexity. And that becomes a core issue in any market and any competitive advantage. So, just to give some examples so that you're not left hanging saying, so what is part of, what are some of those details? Here are two examples from the external forces, demand trends and competitive landscape. It's about changing population mix from the demand, global resources. Where do we find our resources? Where do we find the elements down to the atomic level? Where are the skilled workforces where we locate our companies or where we find our suppliers? Sophisticated, diverse customers. We're all sophisticated customers. Everybody on this session is a sophisticated customer. Social demands for environmental performance. That's not going to go away. That's going to become even more primary going into the future. And while we talk about aging population, it depends on where we are in the world. Some populations are very young and new to consumerism and open markets. So one's got to be a little more febrile in one's approach to what constitutes a market from a competitive point of view. And then, of course, there's the expanding population growth and where is that located? From a competitive landscape side, it's about globalization. I know there's a lot of language now and a lot of things being said around relocating locally. Sorry, that's too expensive. That's really not going to happen. There's always going to be a place for globalization in world economies, full stop. COVID has revealed that, and while there might be a reactionary approach to relocating locally, in reality, that's very short term. The long term is globalization is here to stay. There are always going to be market fluxes. There's going to be potential for substitution. We'll talk about that a little more detail. Communication and knowledge sharing is going to make the world spin. That is the reality. It's not about products. It's about information, knowledge, and knowledge sharing. Innovation and creativity is both here now and into the future. Increased knowledge intensity in products. There are no such things as simple products, but then the simpler they become, the better. Which means there's more technology behind them and more innovation behind them. It's that old adage, if you want something simple, all the complexity has to be built into it without anybody really needing to know how complex it really is. Focus on new market developments, and then that's especially coming out of COVID. Quick-paced production, product innovation, and then pervasiveness of media. E-commerce and social media is here to stay. It's not going to go away. So looking internally very, very quickly, we're going to look at this one factor of infrastructure. And there are some major challenges on whether we actually need all those fixed assets. This is a company issue. Do you really need all those distribution centers and all those trucks? Do you have to own them all? That's a capital investment, and in a time where there's short cash, especially in a COVID world, how do we create dependencies that are positive in working with others? There's a refocus on the value. It's about value. We don't deliver products, we deliver value. That's something we must keep in mind at all times. And it's to move away from the physical assets towards brand equity, and customer relations. The development of new corporate architectures, the networks of suppliers and customers, as well as the collaborative work teams and the value webs. What's fascinating about COVID-19 and the fact that we all work in isolation and work from home and work on collaborative teams using technology is that is the wave of the future. It was the wave before COVID. It is now normative, if you will. We have to seek new biological corporate models. And what do we mean by that? We have to understand organizations, companies, as complex organisms. They have to look at self-governing work teams, continuous learning, and adaptable and flexible processes. We have to emerge as, especially from COVID, as virtual corporations built on alliances, responsive to market demand, being flexible, if you will, and then connect and disconnect as needed. So a federated model, which is a whole other governance issue that at another session, at another time in the future, we can talk about. There's a need for organizational learning. This becomes the key differentiator. It's about knowledge management, organization intelligence, information dissemination, and continuous improvement. Do life cycle marketing. That's a whole thing that will take another session for us to talk about, which includes recycling, or if you will, the reverse logistics and the recycled economy. And then, of course, identify the key decision factors. Always remember that no matter who you are, where you're located, we always have to deal with such fundamental logistics, global trade issues: distance and time, boundaries, import, export, financial differences, currencies, and information and culture. That never goes away. So, for those who are familiar with some of the theories behind competitive advantage, there are two different ones that actually can be brought together in a reasonable way. One is IO, industrial organization, focusing on external forces. This comes from Michael Porter, a name that came out of Harvard, a person who came out of Harvard. People knew him better than, say, Jay Burney, who focused on internal capabilities and created a resource-based approach to competitive advantage. So we have two different approaches that we're going to look at in terms of what makes us competitive. So let's look at industrial organization. Michael Porter identified 5 forces, he created the 5 forces framework. If you're not familiar with this, do a Google on Michael Porter or the 5 forces framework and you'll get more information on it. It's still prevalent to this day. It was, he developed this in the 1990s or late 20th century. But it is still relevant to this day. So those forces that affect the company's ability to serve customers and make a profit, pretty straightforward. And he identified 5 forces. There are horizontal competition, that is competition between companies within the same business sector. So there's always the threat of substitute products or services, the threat of established rivals, Ford versus GM or Toyota for that matter, in the automobile sector, the threat of new entrants, Tesla, in the same automobile world. Then there's the vertical competition, which is within your same market, you also have competition. So as you organize and you have your supply chains, you have suppliers upstream and customers downstream. Both of them have significant power depending on who they are and what their meaning is and what their contributions are to your success. So Porter called this the bargaining power of suppliers and the bargaining power of customers. And so if we look at this a little more closely, I'll do this very, very quickly. There are the 5 forces: competitive rivalry, supplier power, buyer power, threat of substitution, threat of new entry. The focus, but the critical questions. This is what I want to especially get you to think about. So competitive rivalry, it's the number and strength of your competitors. So how many rivals do you actually have, your company or otherwise? By the way, in a job search, it's the same question. How many people are looking for that job that you are applying for? All right, that's a competitive rivalry. Who are these people? Where do they come from? What are their credentials? What are their capabilities, if you will? And how does the quality of their products or services compare with yours? What does their resume look like compared to yours? To put it on a job search focus, or in a job search focus. Now, the supplier power. How easy is it for your suppliers to increase their prices? So this raises some very serious questions. So how many suppliers do you have? If you have only one sole source supply or supplier, you've got problems. If you have too many suppliers, you also have problems. So there's a balance between those two. How unique is the product or service that they will provide you, and how expensive would it be if you were required to find a new supplier? There's one of the issues, very important issue, especially if your supplier happens to go bankrupt, especially with the impact of COVID-19, which has a serious impact on your supply line. Not just because of delivery, but because your suppliers are suffering the same things that you might be suffering from. In terms of lockdown, isolation, so on and so forth. Your buyer power, how easy is it for your buyers to drive their prices down? All right, to drive your prices down. I want this, but I want you to give it to me cheaper. So that raises the question, how many buyers do you have? How big are they, and how big are their orders? All right. If you are, say, a trucking company and you're just dealing with one company who wants to deliver one load to one location, you might actually not be the company, because it's who will take up that load, because it's too expensive for you. There are volumes. You need to cover volumes, whereas that one load doesn't give you enough leverage to make any money. So this becomes important. So how big an order is a very important issue. How much would it cost them to switch from you to a competitor? So there's that issue in terms of your buyers. And then, are your buyers strong enough to dictate terms to you? This is always my fun question. That's something I'll leave with you to think about. Then, of course, there's the threat of substitution. Can your customers find a different way of doing what you do? I remind you about the newspaper. There is a different way to get news. All right, it's Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, so on and so forth. It's not necessarily print. It's not necessarily newscasts on television. All right. If you supply a unique product that automates an important process, can customers replace it simply by reverse engineering and duplicating it internally? Does happen, by the way, or by doing the process manually, or by outsourcing it to somebody totally different. It does happen. And then, of course, the new entry is your position can be affected by people's ability to enter your market. In the automobile world, it's the electronic car, it's the Teslas of the world, so on and so forth. I have a friend who is the CEO of a trucking company in Europe, and they're testing electronic or e-based trucks in Sweden and Norway to replace fossil fuel driven trucks. Very interesting, very cutting edge, very innovative, but it's going to undercut the traditional trucking industry. How easy is it to get a foothold in your industry or market? Is it going to be very costly? How much would it cost? That's the second question. And then is your sector regulated or not? There are lots of regulations. If you're in the alcohol world, especially here in Canada, it's highly regulated. You can't just suddenly, open up a store and start selling a whiskey or wine without the government getting its percentages. So let's look at J.B. Barney. Internal, resource-based, internal capabilities. This is interesting. What I find about this is a resource-based approach to competitive advantage starts with the question, so what makes your business unique? This is a very important question. No matter where you are, no matter what company you work for, and if you are in job search, and you're looking at specific companies and jobs inside of companies, this is a question that everybody should be asking. What makes that business unique? What makes that company unique? And there are some very, very important aspects to it. Resource-based competitive strategy is built on, obviously, resources. So what do we mean? Well, Barney meant, of course, such things as all assets, your processes. Information is a resource. Knowledge, your own history as a company. So the history of an organization is as much a resource that delivers value as anything else. And it's all of that that's owned or controlled by the company, and that allows it to get the job done. Capabilities. So capabilities are organizationally embedded, non-transferable, firm-specific resources that allows the company to improve the productivity of the resources owned by the company. Now, we're gonna unpack those phrases. Organizationally embedded, non-transferable, and firm-specific. Barney unpacks that as I go along, but keep those phrases in mind. So there are classes of resources and capabilities identified by J. Barney. There are tangibles. There are obvious tangibles. You look at any company, physical assets, okay, financial resources, people, human resources, all right, real estate, raw materials, machinery, inventory, brands, registered patents, registered trademarks, and of course, cash. Those are all tangibles. You can touch them. But there are intangibles. This is even more important than tangibles. And those are those embedded routines. They're embedded in the routines and practices of the company. And that includes such things as reputation and culture, knowledge and know-how, experience and relationships that are managed with customers, suppliers, and other stakeholders. You can't touch those things, but they are incredibly important for being competitive, and they are advantages that need to be recognized. And so what J. Barney had looked at is what makes your business unique are the various resources. And he identified three classes of resources: physical capital resources, human capital resources, and organizational capital resources. So the physical, again, kind of obvious. It's technology, plant equipment, geographical location, raw materials, so on and so forth. The human capital resources is very interesting, though, how he describes it. It's not about having all kinds of people. It's about how do you train them? What experiences do you bring into your organization through the people you hire? Are they capable of making judgments and decisions? Right? Do you hire them for their intelligence? Do you hire them because they are collaborative and work through the relationships? Do they bring insights necessary in order to be successful, the company to be successful? So your workforce is bigger than just the number of people that you hire or who reports to you or your job title. It's this cultural side that becomes more important as a differentiator. right? This is important. Then, of course, the organizational capital resources are the reporting structure. Do you have a command, obey reporting structure, or do you have a collaborative reporting structure, a team-based reporting structure? Very important differentiators. Not to say command is not successful, but it is to say it's a culture, right? And it's a resource, and that needs to be identified and understood. Do you have formal and informal planning, controlling, and coordinating systems? What I find interesting about this one with COVID and the fact that we're isolated and we don't have a lot of people going to the office or being in the same place at the same time, what's being missed is the informal planning, conversational, collaborative work. It's more formal. You go to a Zoom meeting, you have an agenda, that's what you talk about. But a lot of work is actually done informally because we collaborate and we converse. That's a major resource. And as we redefine workforce strategies after COVID, we've got to think about what does that mean and how do we handle that. Informal relationships among groups within and between the company and those in the business environment. So to reemphasize what I just said. And so the model created by Jay Barty is this one. A resource-based view relies on resources that are tangible and intangible, we covered that must be heterogeneous and immobile. We'll talk about those two. But they must also be VRIO. They have to have the VRIO attributes. We'll talk about what those VRIO resources are. And that combined, all of that makes you competitive or gives you competitive advantage as a company. So when you think about companies that you're looking at or work in, what makes them unique? This is the way Barney has identified unique factors that make companies competitive in open markets. So heterogeneous. That's the capabilities and resources that differ one company from another. Well, that's pretty straightforward. So if organizations have the same capabilities and resources, they actually could not employ different strategies to outcompete each other. They're the same culture. That's the problem. They're homogeneous, all right? What you look for in a company to be competitive is heterogeneous. That is, companies that may have the same external forces as identified by Michael Porter, but something about their culture makes them different because they implement different strategies that then allow them to outperform others. All right? There's that uniqueness. All right? And then companies that achieve competitive advantage by using different bundles of resources. So it's how you package yourself. Immobile, these are resources that cannot be moved from company to company, right? So your rival company cannot replicate what it is you do and how you do it. It isn't just what you do, it's how you do it. It's your culture. Intangible resources such as your brand and brand equity, your processes, your knowledge and intellectual property fall into this category of immobile. You not only just own them, you live them. That's an important aspect. It is your culture, right? And so you see this coming out most when you have a merger and acquisition. The big fish eats the little fish and the big fish don't have the same cultures. And often enough, there's failure in the relationship between the two. So keep that in mind as you look at different companies around the world. And so this VRIO, well, what is this? I mean, it's an acronym that sometimes makes no sense. Okay, well, this is the way Barney has identified it. Companies are driven by value. Once again, it's not product, but it's value. So your resources are valuable if they help you as an organization to increase the value that you offer to customers. Again, if we had time for another session, I would do a full-blown session on what is value. It is often enough not what we think it is, All right, we seem to have an everyday notion of value. It's a little bit more complex than what our everyday notion. So our value is how we increase our differentiation and decrease the cost of production. And it's not just about cost or money or price. Rarity, resources acquired by one or a few companies are rare. So the uniqueness of your company is rare compared to everybody else. Imitability is a terrible word to try to say quickly. I just said it. If you notice, I said it slowly. And these are resources that are costly if someone else wants to replicate them and imitate what it is that you do. It's going to be so ineffective that they're not going to do it. All right. So, and it's going to be cost ineffective for them to go find a competitor to work with, because the value that they get from you is so unique that it cannot be imitated anywhere else. An Aston Martin is unique. May not be the best car in the world, but it is unique and it cannot be imitated. All right. And then, of course, your organization, how you're organized. Resources do not confer any advantage if the company is not prepared to capture the value from them. So you could have quote unquote stuff that you do that is valuable. It's rare. It's you can't imitate it, imitable. But if you can't capture that as an organization, it means nothing. It means absolutely nothing. So to put it in finer terms, to achieve competitive advantage, you have to have value and rarity. To sustain, there's a difference between achieving and sustaining. To sustain competitive advantage, you have to be imitable, and your organization has to recognize and make use of all of the other three. And so competitive advantage is when a company implements a value-creating strategy not simultaneously implemented by any current or potential competitors. A sustained competitive advantage is when a company implements a value-creating strategy not simultaneously implemented by any current or potential competitors, and when these competitors are unable to duplicate the benefits of this strategy. So we get into what is the decision model. And this is the greatest thing to come out of Barney's approach to resource-based. Is the resource or capability of my company valuable? If it isn't, then I don't have any competitive advantages at all. I have a disadvantage. If it is valuable, then the question is, resource or capability of my company rare, unique to me? If not, then I have competitive parity. I'm just like all the other companies that I am in the same vertical or business in. If my resource or capability is valuable and rare, and it is costly to imitate, then that's is it costly to imitate? If it's no, then I have a temporary competitive advantage, but not a sustainable one. If yes, that it is costly to imitate, then the final question is the firm organized to capture all of that value in those three previous sections? If no, once again, I can temporarily compete and make money, but I'm not sustainable. If yes, that the company is committed and is unique in how it understands itself and has all of those features that I just described, then we have sustained competitive advantage. And so when we look at the differentiation between the 5 forces and the resource-based framework, the focus of 5 sources is the business vertical, the whole industry, the IO, the industrial organization. If we look at it from the resource, it's about the company itself, the corporation. If we look at the 5 forces from the kinds of things you need to do in order to be competitive, it's about low cost and differentiation. If you look at it from a resource-based, it's about your resources, your capabilities, and your core competencies. If you look at how we compete in the marketplace from a five forces framework, we act. We do all these things that are necessary to compete. From a resource base, it's really about our core products, our value proposition, and our strategic architecture. It's more internal. And the strategy for competing, it's about going head to head against your rivals. So it's a rivalry mode. And if it's resource-based, it's really about my real estate. What do I have? How much do I have? How do I value it? Who's in there? What's my intelligence? So on and so forth. It's my real estate. And so if we do a SWOT analysis on this, we see that strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Internal capabilities fall in line, that is the resource base, fall in line. It has strengths, it has weaknesses. It's inward focused. Industrial organization, five forces, is outward focused. So it looks for opportunities, but it also has threats. And so let me end with what I call a market-driven model. And how do we go about redefining competitive advantage? This is not about thinking outside the box. It's about reinventing the box. It's about building a whole new box. All right. And basically, what I'm going to show you is how we at the Logistics is to redefine supply chain logistics in ways that are somewhat unique, but actually are focused on stakeholder needs and requirements. So it's a stakeholder, market-driven strategy. And it looks like this. At the top of the pyramid for supply chain logistics is value. All companies, no matter who they are, no matter what they do, the value proposition or the value is to deliver value in the marketplace. It's not about delivering products. It's about answering the question, why would anybody come to us as a company to buy our product or service from us? All right? What is the value of what it is that we do and what we deliver in the marketplace? Supporting value at the top of the pyramid is how do we manage relationships upstream and downstream? Upstream is our network strategy of suppliers. Downstream is our channel towards to our customers, whether they're individual customers, corporate customers, B2B, B2C, whatever. And by the way, that managing relationships along those two networks, upstream, downstream, is really what we call supply chain. Right? But the supply chain supports the value. It doesn't exist just for the sake of existing. However, your supply chain is built on your sustained processes. Your sustained processes are logistics processes. It's about procurement, inventory, distribution. If delivering value in the market, hence it's a market-driven model, is the core of why you exist, then you have to have processes that support your network designs, your network relationships that then support your value proposition. And what's important about that middle logistics, which is end-to-end from purchasing all the way to distribution to whatever customers in your supply chain or in your channel, what's the middle of logistics, it's traditionally either called procurement, supply management, or distribution management, but actually the heart of logistics is asset ROI, inventory, making money from your assets. It's about those assets that make your logistics successful, all right? Not about whether you buy or whether you sell. It's about what you do with what you have, right? And even more important, the base of all of this stakeholder market-driven model is your enablers. What enables the success is your IT. IT is an enabler. Your policies and procedures are enablers. They're not core to what the business should be or is. Your facilities and equipment. But your organizational structure, however you're organized, top down, command structure or collaborative structure, depends on the kind of company, but it is an important factor, but it's an enabler. Your stakeholders or your shareholders are not at the top of the pyramid in this model. They are essential, they are the cornerstone, but it's not the reason for the existence of the company. All right? All the stakeholders here, which include your suppliers and your customers, as well as the market generally, as well as all the people involved in your processes and so on and so forth, they are the stakeholders in what makes this a stakeholder strategy, and it's market driven. Having said that, this, for me, is the most important quotation I have ever run into. And it's not by a man I particularly like on a personal level, but I don't know him on a personal level. That is, in redefining competitiveness, how do we become customer-centric? What I want you to think about is Amazon. Jeff Bezos, the former CEO of Amazon, once said this, and I think this has got to be the most incredible insight into competitiveness I have ever seen. Do not be competitor-focused. Be customer-focused. We at Amazon see customers as invited guests to a party, and we are the hosts. It's our job every day to make every important aspect of the customer experience a little bit better. So it's not about shareholders. It's not about products. As a matter of fact, Bezos would actually tell you he doesn't sell anything. He doesn't even know what his products are. It's not about all that. It's about ensuring that the customer experience is better every single day. And if you don't think that a customer-centric competitiveness is important, go look at Amazon a little more closely and see who's making the money, even during COVID-19. Again, Bezos, nothing gives us more pleasure at Amazon than reinventing normal. And so if we want to be competitive, we have to be prepared to reinvent normal. And by the way, COVID-19 is forcing us to reinvent normal. We should not be afraid of COVID-19 except on a personal level from a health point of view. From a business point of view, we should look for ways on how we can reinvent normal in terms of being competitive in global markets. And so the world is where everything happens. We're not ready to go to the moon yet, though there are lots of efforts being made to do that, or Mars for that matter. And for us at the Logistics Institute, supply chain and logistics is the driving force of human achievement. And I ask all of you, this is my last slide, I ask all of you to think about anything that we do as individuals, as companies, as economies, that does not involve logistics. A 5-year-old birthday party, organizing it and preparing it requires logistics. And if you've ever organized a birthday party for a 5-year-old, you know exactly how complex that can be. Feeding the world is about logistics. Building a pyramid in Egypt or in Mazatlan is about logistics. All right? Let's always remember that. The driving force of human achievement is supply chain and logistics. Thank you.